Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about the wee folk.
The little peoples who might live in a hole in the ground.
Named Bilbo Baggins. Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
You'll notice we've done a little bit of rearranging. And that's because we got some new bookshelves.
Yeah.
So we can put books where they belong and organize better. And wow, that took us most of the morning.
Folks, I gotta tell you, Delaney and I have both been collecting. We're both readers. We read a lot. And this isn't even the books that we have. We have books upstairs in bookshelves.
Well, you kind of saw what we had, and we just got two new big bookshelves to organize all of our Pathfinder books, and all of our D&D books, and all of our Starfinder books, and all of our Star Wars books, everything. So we're going to be talking today about Halflings, Hobbits, or as I call them in my world, Hauflyn. Hauflyn. Hauflyn.
Yeah. Well, it's really kind of a common character in a sense in the fantasy realm. I mean, we owe that to Tolkien. Like, okay, he came up with the whole thing about halflings, or hobbits, whatever you want to call them. And I'm sure just about anybody, if they close their eyes, can imagine what a halfling or a hobbit looks like.
Yeah, if you've seen the Lord of the Ring movies,
or
the Hobbit,
or the cartoons that they had, any of that.
Yep.
Now, we got to also talk about, at first, the controversy.
Right, because at first they actually were called hobbits.
Yeah, they were called hobbits.
And they were the spitting image of Tolkien's hobbits. With hairy feet, hairy big unchewed feet.
Yeah, like big padded feet, like you see in the Lord of the Rings movies.
Mm-hmm.
However, the Tolkien estate got a little mad at D&D for that and said you couldn't use hobbits because hobbit is an actual trademarked name
by the Tolkien estate.
So what did D&D do? Well, they came out with the term halfling, which would be,
like half a person.
Like half a person. Half the size of a person. Okay. Delaney changed it a little bit more and calls them Hauflyns, which is kind of a different way of saying halfling.
Right.
In a sense. I'm trying to imagine, have there been any other authors who have really delved into the...
There was another author... I think his last name was McKinnon. I'll try to remember to dig it up, but there were some wee folk that they had that were very reminiscent of Tolkien.
Okay. See, I'm trying to rack my brain about whether or not during fantasy stuff I've run into more smaller people like that. Now, I'm not talking about gnomes, I'm not talking about dwarves. We're talking specifically about halflings, hobbits, that sort of thing.
Right.
And if any other author had sort of approached that kind of area or that sort of character in their work without treading on Tolkien's
after
toes.
Tolkien,
yeah. If anybody knows about something like that, please let us know. I mean, we don't know everything, and we can do our research, but I can tell you right now that what a lot of people have, especially a lot of people who follow our channel, I'm sure you have a lot of specialized knowledge, and you probably know of something somewhere where someone has come up with this sort of character that is really close to or reminiscent of a hobbit or halfling.
But they don't call them hobbit or halfling.
But they don't call them that.
Like I said, there was that author McKinnon, and I'll dig it up before we post this episode and post it down below. His name, because I know it was a male writer, and the books. There was a three book series, and I think he came out with some more after that. Okay,
we'll look into that. And I'd highly encourage our folks to look in this also so we can come up with some information. All right, so if you close your eyes, like I said before, and you picture a hobbit or a halfling in your head, what do you picture? Well, most people picture like a small person.
Yeah, they're usually like no taller than only three and a half is like on the extreme. But I think in Pathfinder and D&D they shrunk them down a little bit more to make them smaller than even gnomes.
Yeah, I think they're about 3 feet or more or less.
I think they're like 2 to 2.5 feet is what they describe them at in Pathfinder. Yeah,
You
really
know,
small, which is
okay. Come
to
on.
me they're 3 to 3.5.
Yeah, I mean
gnomes to me are smaller.
Yeah, they talk about, in Lord of the Rings, they talk about there was the one halfling ancestor who was big enough to ride an actual horse or a pony and to wield a warhammer. Now he was over 4.5 to almost 5 feet tall.
Right, and then of course Merry and Pippin, after they drank the Ent.
Yeah, the Entwash, they got a little higher.
Yeah, they were a lot taller. They were like small humans.
Yeah, so in a sense, we have this idea that they're maybe about 3 feet tall. They're the size of a child, I guess you'd say. I couldn't tell you, exactly what year, because kids grow at all kind of different sizes and paces. But I'm thinking something elementary school kid,
yeah, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade maybe.
Yeah.
Tops.
And, a lot of the general idea about halflings is that they're kind of well fed. They're kind of, they enjoy life.
They're not
enjoy
poorly,
their food.
but...
Yeah, I mean, but they have, sort of a stoutness about them that indicates that they work as people. They're not like skinny little kids running around or even like skinny little gnomes. They have a strength about them. You could have a halfling. Could you have a halfling blacksmith?
Sure.
Okay. I mean, you'd have like a muscular kind of halfling blacksmith that wasn't a dwarf, but it was still sort of a halfling. And what would distinguish them from a dwarf?
Well, usually their hair is more curly.
Okay.
And it's more reds and blondes and light browns. They can be dark browns, but
they can.
They don't usually have black hair, and
yeah.
But it's usually the blondes, the reds, and light browns.
Then there's the question of their big hairy feet. Now, we don't know for sure if everyone carries out that idea of them having big hairy feet.
Yeah.
That's from Tolkien. You have the big padded hairy feet, almost like rabbits in a weird way. But would in every world or in Pathfinder or other things, would they look like that, or would they have shoes on?
Yeah, in Pathfinder they wear shoes. I think in D&D they wear shoes too. That's a carryover from when they got sued. In my world, they don't. I mean, they can if they want to, but they typically...
But they usually go around barefoot?
Yeah.
Okay.
Those who go on adventure may wear shoes, but they may not. It kind of just depends upon where they were raised and how they were raised.
Okay.
And, it's because a big clown shoe.
Yeah, I mean, come on. I mean, when you think about...
Unless their foot is the size of a normal human,
Well, that's another thing, is if they're this tall and their foot is like that, I mean, that's like a big human foot. They could pull on a pair of boots or moccasins or something if they had to.
Yeah. Their ears are usually slightly pointed.
Mm-hmm. Not overly pointed, but not like the big elves that kind of come up like that, which is ridiculous. But maybe something along, not even like Spock ears, but maybe where you get to the top, and the top is just kind of a slight little point to them. And I think that has a little bit to do with ancestry. And I think there's this kind of general ancestry that maybe they sort of came from elves in a certain way, or they have a little bit of genetics associated with elves because the elves with the pointy ears. I think in the TV show Lord of the Rings on TV, I think they call them half folk, right?
Yeah, I think so.
There's a
wee folk.
Wee folk or something like that, and they do have, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they do have like the slight point to their ears, if I remember right.
Yeah, and then their skin tone tends to be a little bit kind of tanned almost, like because they're out in their gardens all the time.
Yeah.
Out enjoying, the fresh air and
that was a
nature.
That was a big controversy when The Hobbit came out. Is that in Hobbiton where people live, you had these various darker skinned, curly haired sorts of wee folk living there, and people pitched a huge fit. Oh no, all hobbits are like Nordic looking, blonde haired and blue eyed with this. It's like, come on. If you read the Tolkien stuff, they vary in all different ways and shapes and sizes like that. So, to try to shoehorn them into something, if you're of your own idea, is kind of ridiculous. It just doesn't work. And I don't, personally, I just don't understand.
Well, the bigger controversy happened with the Rings of Power.
Yes, that's right.
Because now they had kind of, African, or black, or even Asian, and a lot of people didn't like that. It was too, use the term woke for them.
Yeah. And they were talking about the wee folk, the travelers who used to, travel around.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And I'm not going to go too much into the story of that. If you know the story, you've seen it. But try to picture, the travel folk as they're moving around with their carts and stuff. Yeah. They were all various, shades of people and everything like that. Which leads us to where they might live.
All right. Now, typically we imagine them, like in The Hobbit, living in a hole in the ground, like the.
the song. Yeah.
He lives in a hobbit hole and everybody knows him, Bilbo. Bilbo Baggins.
Bilbo.
Yeah, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. That sort of thing. That's how it starts. Now, do they have to live in a hole in the ground? Can they live in a little hut? Can they live in a little cottage somewhere or underneath a stone or something like that? Why? Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, I figure they can. I mean, you're kind of open to wherever they would live, right? They don't have to live in a hollow tree trunk.
No.
They can live wherever they want. So
yeah, it's wherever their village is, and whatever the village might consist of. It might consist of stone houses or houses underground, or a combination of both.
It's like, do all elves live in trees? Do all dwarves live under mountains? No. It really depends on how people integrate themselves into society. If you live in a village and there's all sorts of people in the village, typically they're going to live around each other as neighbors. So I don't see that there's a huge problem with that. Now, you can start stepping on people's toes when it comes to lore. And I know this. You can step on people's toes when it comes to specific sorts of lore. But as far as I'm concerned, I think whatever DMs want to do, as long as it makes sense
in their world,
I think it's probably okay.
Yeah. Now, what kind of professions would they have? Now, what do we typically think of halflings as? Well, the quintessential rogue or thief.
Yeah.
And that's because of the whole burglar aspect of it. Yeah. And in first edition, they were quite good at the thievery skill.
Sure. Nimble.
Yeah,
quiet.
Nimble.
They can, as Gandalf said, they can pass unseen where no one else can. There's that sort of thing. Can scurry about like a mouse. I've played halfling bards, which were really fun to play because they can disguise themselves as children and beg in the streets like that to get extra money. And I had this whole thing going where they would disguise themselves as a human child, rub some dirt on their face and go around, please sir, may I have a coin? My father will beat me if I don't come with a coin. I had that sort of thing going, but they were actually a grown-up halfling who would go around the corner, shake his money bag, go around and buy some ale, and he'd take his disguise off, or she would, or whatever, that sort of thing. So we had that, and also bards. I had played a lot of halfling bards because they get special, abilities for that, for magic and skills, and I really, really had a fun time playing that kind of stuff.
Right.
Delaney brought up druid, which I have never thought of a halfling druid, but then again, in their gardens, tending the earth, I never thought of that, but I got to look into that, trying to see
about... They might have a badger friend.
Yeah, they might have a badger friend. So...
They have a badger sitting over
Badger friend. He wanted to be here for the Hobbit story. So, it kind of makes you wonder, okay, would they make a good druid? Well...
Absolutely.
Yeah, they have magical abilities.
Yeah, they're great with nature.
They're great with nature, yeah.
Or even a ranger.
Yeah, okay, I would say they would make a great ranger, but they're limited in combat.
Well, they're not going to be able to do as much damage, but does a ranger have to become as strictly combat orientated as a lot of people think of them? No. They're not going to be doing a lot of damage with bow or weapon, but they're not going to get their sneak attack.
I've always been sort of resentful of the fact that people always assume that a ranger has to be a warrior. Yeah. Why can't a ranger just be a scout? Why can't they just be the person who sneaks up and looks?
Scouts it out,
comes back, tells the general, they're over the hill. If you attack by dawn, you'll get them. I'm going to go get some rest. That's it. That's the way I've always wanted to play rangers. It's just like scouts. If they get into a tight squeeze, maybe they can fight their way out of it with a dagger or a short bow or something like that. But as opposed to having a ranger as a frontline fighter, I just don't like it because there's no need for it. You have the fighter class for that reason. You don't need to morph the ranger into fighter.
If you're a min-max or power gamer type, they're not going to be doing a lot of damage.
Right.
They're never going to do a lot of damage.
I know, that's the thing. They don't get the hit points.
if you're okay with that, that's fine. You know, just know that as a halfling, you're not going to be the one dealing all this maximum damage and taking things out. You know, because your bow is going to be doing less damage.
Yeah.
Your sword is going to be. You're not like you're going to be carrying a two-handed sword because it's too big for you.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah, so I don't know if they're actually limited in playing a ranger, but I think if you played them right, I think it would work quite well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other thing, like would it be like some kind of a wizard?
Well, sure, they could be a wizard. Why not a wizard, or even a cleric?
A cleric, okay. Yeah, I mean
they could pretty much fill any role. They're smaller and they're not as noticeable.
Yeah, halfling paladin.
Sure, riding a dog.
Yeah, right. riding
a pony.
Riding a pig. Yeah, I don't know.
Riding a badger.
Yeah, you should probably keep it within reason if you're going to have something like that.
Just it could be fun as a halfling paladin. But
you could have an all halfling game, and then you could make like a halfling paladin.
Sure.
Yeah.
He's the champion of the group. Writing the righteous.
Sure. Okay, so why play them in the first place? And then I always say campaign suitability. So I have a little anecdote here, and I love playing halflings just
Tom's told
because
the story many times.
Yeah, just because of the abilities they get, and they're fun to play. They can sneak around, they can disguise themselves, they can, pickpocket things. We were going to do a campaign. It was a canned campaign, and everybody's like, "Yeah, okay, roll up a 4th level character." And I was like, "Okay, cool, man. I'm going to do a halfling bard. This is going to be so fun. It's going to be part bard, part rogue. This is going to be great." Little did I know that the campaign was going to be against Titan Spawn, which is essentially...
We started off as 1st level in that, not 4th level.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought we were a little higher.
We started off at like 1st or 2nd level in that.
I seem to remember that we started off a little higher.
We got up to... I think we got up to like 5th or 6th level, but yeah.
Oh, it was... Well, anyway, we started out, and Titan Spawn are essentially children of Godzilla. So there's my little halfling guy with his light crossbow and dagger. Everybody else is some kind of paladin, fighter, cleric, something with massive weaponry. And there's my little guy. And I was just like, I am lost in this game. What am I going to do? I run up with the dagger and stab it in the toenail.
Yeah, backstab it in the heel.
Yeah, in the Achilles tendon. Ow! And then I run.
Oh, it's immune to backstab. Oh, gee, great.
Shoot. So that was the thing. It's like campaign suitability. Should you play a halfling or a hobbit in a campaign where really you're not suited to playing something like that?
Yeah.
And so that's my big question to the DMs out there. When you create a campaign, do you keep that in mind where someone, wants to play something like that? Would you just, try to morph them into a player would you just try to morph them into a player or not?
As a DM, I think it's your responsibility to make everybody feel accommodated and worthwhile. Give them their moment to shine. If you don't do that, then it's you're taking away a lot of fun.
Yeah, I just basically felt that my character was worthless.
Yeah,
really worthless. Everyone. It was just this. It was a canned campaign, and it turned into this big slaughter fest. And my little guy is just like running around in circles trying to avoid being stepped on. Yay. Yeah. So we didn't have a whole lot of fun. And then the assassins showed up. I don't know where these assassins came from, but they were just, level 8 assassins or something. And I was like, why? I was like, okay, they're going to kill my character off, and I'm going to roll up a tunnel fight in dwarf, man. I mean it. But it never got that far. But anyway, campaign suitability. If you want to play something like that, I suppose you should look at the campaign and decide whether or not a halfling would be suitable for that campaign.
I would make sure you talk to your DM, or as a DM, talk to your players about the, but once again, as a DM, I feel it's kind of my responsibility to make sure that character isn't a waste, and and that player's having fun.
Yeah.
Isn't being stepped on and being left out, because if you do that, you're going to lose a player.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that I was wanting to jump out of the game, because I was, anytime I play, I have a lot of fun. But I was just a little perturbed that that's how that was working. So that hasn't stopped me from playing halflings. I'll play one every chance I get, because I love to play halflings.
Yeah.
I love the whole concept of in D&D or Pathfinder that you can make your own way in the world just by your actions and your roles and what you do. So that's pretty cool.
Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about, in my world, I've actually kind of expanded Halflings. I actually came up with a bunch of general slang and greetings and expressions and things like that. I have a OneNote sheet that is just, it's massive with all this stuff that I've come up with.
And it's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Blaney's got a whole language and a whole slang here. So we're just going to start.
It's not a language, this is just a slang. Because they speak, in my world, they speak in the common, what most people, you know, the language of the area. But they have slang that they use.
So I'll just start with general greetings and then we'll kind of switch off back
kind of
and
pick
forth.
your favorite ones. As you
Okay, so if they met each other on the road and they met another halfling, they would say stuff like, you know, a friendly greeting akin to like good day. You'd say small skies, traveler. That's something like that. Or you'd say holes and hearth. That's like gratitude, like home sweet home.
Yeah. Stay rooted. A way of saying take care and don't stray too far.
Yeah. Keep your feet dry now. That's a farewell. That you'd say goodbye to someone. You know, instead of saying watch out or take heed, you'd say keep your feet dry.
Winds know your name. It's a poetic farewell.
Yeah. Winds know your name, my friend. Or by the stone. Meaning, you know, by the gods. Instead you'd say by the stone. Or an exclamation of excitement. You know, we'd say, hey, this is really great. You'd say fire in the pit. Wow.
You might insult somebody. So you might call somebody a barefoot fool, which is a mild insult, meaning you're clueless, implying carelessness. Goblinkin, a deep insult implying one is uncultured or unrefined. Berry-brained, a playful insult for someone acting foolish or forgetful.
Why, you sure are berry-brained.
Yeah. A broken barrel, a person who can't keep secrets, like a leaking container.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
You're a broken barrel, aren't you? I like that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Food and drinks, things that they have. A berry cider, a strong home-brewed drink that warms the belly. Nibblekin, a term for someone who eats only small portions or snacks frequently. You hear nothing about a nibblekin.
Aren't you?
Yeah. Toad pocket, a quick savory snack, often bread stuffed with meat or veggies.
Like a hot pocket.
Yeah. You're quite the spade slinger. A hardworking, especially in gardening or farming.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Things that you would have, a lazy person is a river dodger. A skilled, resourceful person is a net knitter, meaning net, like they're a fishing net.
Yeah.
A fidgety or nervous person is a tail twitcher. If you're complimenting someone on being clever, you'd say, my, aren't you candle bright? Or bright as a candle.
Yeah.
A term for someone who rushes through tasks and cuts corner, well, they're a bucket tosser. I like that.
Yeah. Travel and adventure. Pony quick, a way to say let's go or hurry up.
Let's get pony quick.
Yep. Barefoot's folly, a term for foolish or risky adventure. Wind in your toes, wishing someone a smooth journey or an adventure. May the wind be in your toes. Bridge bender, a skilled navigator or someone who connects distant places. Let's see what else we got here. Relationships and social life. Somebody who's a biscuit mate, a close friend or confidant. Let's see. A pot stewer, somebody who gossips.
Pot stewer?
Pot stirrer.
Pot stirrer. Yeah, you stir the pot. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I like that.
Let's see. A song circle, a close-knit group of friends or companions. Hearth warmer, a term for someone who brings comfort and joy to others.
Yeah, I like that.
Nature's.
So then we have nature and surroundings. A mud paws is someone who works too hard in the garden or field. And in other words, they always stay out there, they never come out. You know, they never come back and enjoy the hearth. So they'd be called a mud paws. A sunbiter, a term for an early riser or someone who works at dawn. So you could say, well, he's a sunbiter, isn't he? Out working when dawn's light. A cloud catcher, who would be a daydreamer. Someone who's always out laying around looking up at the sky.
Oh, you said the cloud catcher.
Yeah, the cloud catcher. A rock sitter, someone who's steady and dependable. Kind of like a stone sitter, too, is the same thing. A leaf whisperer, someone who's deeply in tune with nature. A rain chaser, someone who enjoys exploring during storms. A root grabber, a gardener or someone who loves tending to plants. A root grabber. Ah, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So these are just some of those.
Delaney often comes up with these background things for characters and settings and everything. That's, you know, you can have these slang languages and different sorts of things. It works out pretty good.
Don't you be such a copper snatcher there, Mr. Baggins. A frugal or stingy person.
That would be the other Bagginses who are
Yes.
like that. The Sackville Bagginses.
Well, I'll just give you a barley bribe then. A term for a small token gift to win someone's favor.
Okay.
Yeah. He's got golden hands, which means a craftsman whose work is highly valuable. Let's see. Well, I had the rabbit's folly, a small mistake or an accident. Let's see. Well, I had the turn of the pebbles, which means to turn bad luck or change one's fortune.
To change one's fortune, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that's nice.
Well, I've had a turn of a hollow acorn, which means bad luck, disguised as a blessing.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, let's see. Leaf in the wind, someone who's frail or sickly.
You know, I don't get that, though. A leaf in the wind blows where it's going. So maybe, I don't know.
Well, it's like it's falling off the branch, and it's just kind of going.
kind of going down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pepperroot, an energetic or lively person.
Okay.
Slug tongue, someone who's slow to wake up or start the day. Time and weather, things like sun's yawn. That's the twilight or the sunset. The sun's yawn. The moon watch, staying up late into the night. So these are just all sorts of, I've got, I think this thing is probably about 12 pages or more. And it's not just halflings, it's what they might say to humans or to elves or, call a dragon or a giant or whatever.
Well, and this is Delaney's world, so they're called Hauflyns.
Yeah, Hauflyn.
Hauflyns. That was...
H-A-U-F.
You had a spelling for it.
Yeah, it's right there. It's right there.
So, not everybody has to come up with languages or something like this, but Delaney always comes up with a lot of background. And I think it really infuses the story and the setting with a lot of character and context, and I think it works out really good. That's one of the great things about having a DM who doesn't use canned stuff, who designs their own world. It's really nice. So this is just one of the ways.
And just coming up with ways for them to talk. So if you've got a player who's playing a halfling, maybe they'll say these slangs.
Sure,
they'll throw them out there.
It's part of role playing. I mean, not everybody role plays, and not everybody has to.
No.
But if you can, it's always nice to do it.
Yeah. So I think we're going to end this episode of Wizards of the Tower.
Role play. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, spread the word, ring the bell, because that gives you notifications. We try to put something out every Friday, but if we get real busy with life, sometimes we don't get to record. Sometimes it doesn't work all the
So we apologize that there hasn't been something for a little while, but we're going to get some more stuff recorded.
Yep.
busy life and everything else. So anyway, may all your adventures be epic.
And keep on rolling.
Thanks, folks.